Good. Hi, everybody. I'm Al Filreis. You remember me? I'm here at the Kelly Writers House at noon Eastern Time, Philadelphia time, and I've got some friends here. I'm going to introduce some friends, and then I'm going to do some initial shout-outs, and then we're going to get started with your calls and your questions. We've got a discussion forum thread that Julia has made, and it's called what, Julia?
Welcome to the October 29 webcast.
Yes. And when I introduce Bob Perlman, I'm going to mention that Bob has joined ModPo for part of this week, I guess, and he'll be able to talk with you in the discussion forums. Okay, so you're going to be writing questions and comments in that thread that Julia is going to be monitoring. You'll also be tweeting us. It's hashtag ModPoLive, ModPoLive. We will look at the tweets and phone calls, 215-573-9752, 215-573-9752. So let me just introduce everybody or reintroduce everybody. Jason is here, and it's been a little while since Jason's been with us. Welcome back, Jason. Look, there's the view. Jason, wave. Everybody can see you. Jason is there. And while we've got that view, Zach, we have Ariel Resnikoff here, and there's Ari, and we have James, who goes by James rather than Jim. James, who's here, and we have Lily Applebaum, who's by the phone and also has a mic so she can be brilliant as usual. Chris Martin is a miracle man, and he and Zach have spent 2 hours setting this up. This is ridiculous. What a setup. And Zach Cardiner, who doesn't like to be visible, but show something, Zach. There's the hand of Zach Cardiner. And to my far right and your far, 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 far left is Michelle Taransky. And I'm going to introduce her a little more properly in a second. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for asking me.
And you have to be real close to that mic.
Thank you.
And to my right and your somewhat left, but really far, far left, Bob Perlman, the Bob Perlman, who is a poet of Chapter 9.1 poet. I'm going to introduce him more in a second. Hello, Bob. Thanks for doing this.
Hello, hello.
And to my immediate left is the remarkable collaborator, colleague, co-teacher, Julia Block.
Good midday to you.
Good midday to you. And we have in their little boxes, we have coming from Boston, Anna Strong. Hello, Anna.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Anna. You're sporting some pretty good earbuds there. That's cool. The new thing. And Erica Kaufman, who is upstate New York and sad that the leaves have mostly fallen.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Erica. And we have Max McKenna in Chicago. Hello, Max.
Good morning, Al.
Hey, good morning. It's 11 a.m. there. It's 12 here.
It's technically the morning, yes, here.
So we'll just say afternoon. And Molly O'Neill, speaking of morning, it's 9 a.m. where Molly is in Los Angeles.
It is. Good morning.
Hey. And Molly O'Neill will be flying to San Francisco next week. We will announce the exact time and place of the meetup, but she's convening a meetup. And Max, soon after, will be convening a meetup at the Poetry Foundation. Max, what's the date and time?
That is November 11th. That's a Tuesday, Armistice Day, actually, at 6 p.m.
Max is going to bring peace from poetry.
I will bring something.
Something. Bring the Paul Simon song? What does that mean?
There's an Armistice Day.
Armistice Day. Okay, cool. Do that. Thank you, Lily, for embarrassing me and my lack of knowledge of pop culture, even though Simon doesn't count as pop culture. And we will announce Molly's time and place, which is coming up next week when we have it. Okay, some shout-outs real quick. Carol Stephen has sent us 2 books of her poems. Carol Stephen is a 3-year ModPoer from Canada. We wish you well in Canada, all of you, Carol, and everybody. We hope things are safer in Canada today. And these are 2 books that Carol sent us. Thank you, Carol. Also, Lorraine Schechter has sent us this remarkable book called Seasons of Yes, The Seasons of Yes, which is illustrated poems and really fantastic. Another fabulous ModPoer. Thank you. Michael Aiken from Australia this is a very serious book of poems. Oops, it's too dark. Look at Zach adjusting. A vicious example. Michael Aiken. I'm in touch with him through ModPo and also by email. And we're really just proud and honored that such an amazing poet has joined us as a quote-unquote student. Diana Aubert cooked these candies from Switzerland to Prague, and then I schlepped them back here. Diana wanted everybody to have them, so I'm going to ask Michelle to tear this open and open it up so that people here can share these fabulous candies. Thank you, Diana. 3 more quick shout-outs, and then we'll get started. Actually 4. Ken, you may remember Ken from New Orleans, from Louisiana, who called, who is a calligrapher, letter writer, and I had this great conversation with him back in early October, and I said, would you write me a letter? And he has written me a gorgeous letter in calligraphic script, and he says all kinds of beautiful things about ModPo, but mostly what he says is I have over 100 pens and 50 kinds of ink, and he enjoys handwriting, especially italic, and he owns customized italic nibs, and I have always wanted to have those. Will you send some, please? Nuola and Christ. Her sister turned her on to ModPo. She's in Chicago. I hope, Nuola, you're going to attend Max's thing at the Poetry Foundation. She and her sister talk about the poems over the phone. We don't do close readings, but she spends full days in ModPo and ModPo Plus, and she's been doing sort of a Facebook page of snippets of her poetry, and she spends most of her days in class, and this class has altered my life and given me an outlet, even though it is mostly interior. I was like a brain within its groove until I allowed myself to explore the silver and found a real key therein. I also had the thought that a videotaping of a Skype conference would be another way to do a close reading. Nuola, we are so glad that you're with us, and we hope you and your sister keep talking about poems over the phone, over long distance, even after ModPo. Cool. 2 more shout-outs. Golita Jansen, who's been very active in the forums. She's part of the Emergent University thread, the Emergent University, and she writes as follows. I've been teaching at a university for 20 years in a professional school, retired now, but definitely had hope for many aspects of teaching and learning that you proposed, and indeed tried a lot of what you promote, meaning me and others in the Emergent University thread. Hard to make those changes in a system where grades are the standards and course outlines are contracts and students need to work and hurry in and out of class. Community of scholars, yes, that was my idea as well. Inclusive, global, and inspiring, life-changing. This course has changed my idea about online courses. I find it to be a community of learners, open, inspiring, and for me, life-changing. Thank you, Golita. We're so glad you're part of this. And finally, Christine Coates, who a day ago wrote, I think she's praising the staff and me. That's nice. She calls me amazing. That's nice. Then she says, also, Kelly Writer's House and the TAs make this feel very much like a live university classroom. I've done 3 degrees with English as a major, and I've never been taught like this. It's amazing to have this level and quality of teaching. It's like doing a master's degree. I can see I will retake ModPo for as long as it's available. What a privilege, which is really heartwarming. Thank you, Christine. And yes, ModPo will continue. We'll be here next year and on into the future. So we are ready to talk about Chapter 9.1 poets, and we have a Chapter 9.1 poet sitting to my right. He's here. We're all sort of 9.1 poets at heart, I think. But this guy is like on the curriculum, so how does that feel to be the guy? I don't know what. The ambassador from 9.1.
I'll do my best. That's all I can say. I'll say what I'm authorized to say by my status and my constituency, and that's my diplomatic position.
You are funny. So what I recommend you do is go immediately after this webcast or during it, because wasting time on the internet is what we do when we're doing ModPo, right? You just go to another window and you go to Amazon, or better yet, you go to Wesleyan University Press, and you type in 1021, T-O, 1021, and get the selected poems of Bob Perlman. It's a must. Or ask someone for the holidays to get you one. I'd also recommend his first book, which is called The Trouble with Genius, which really The Trouble with Genius, which is really important to ModPo because basically it's a chapter 9.1 poet thinks about modernists and the idea of the genius. As you know, one of the differences that we talk about in ModPo between modernism and postmodernism, so-called, is there's a lot of continuity. One of the differences is this critique of the concept of genius. And so Bob does it through, among others, Louis Zukowski, who's not, alas, in ModPo but needs to be there, but also Gertrude Stein, who's a really important figure for Bob, and I bet it'll come up. So that's Bob. And also, please note that Bob Perlman is in the forums, and we will make sure that everybody sees where he is. He signed himself up as Bob. So,
I thought I was doing it correctly. What can I say?
So you'll have to find Bob, but we might be able to correct that. But even if we don't, we will point out where he is.
I'll cut it and paste it and resubmit it as Bob Perlman.
You don't have to.
No?
We will make sure everybody knows where you are.
Okay.
But it's so great. Bob Perlman, Chapter 9.1 poet, is in ModPo, and you can talk to him not just in this webcast. Michelle Taransky, who is a wonderful poet, a fabulous teacher, a fine critic, and a dear, dear friend of the Writers' House and of me and of everybody in this room. And what I recommend is Sorry Was in the Woods. Sorry Was in the Woods, 2013. And Barn Burned Then, 2008. Those two books of poems you should buy, you should read, you should love. She's great. Thank you again for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we've got Mark Snyder from North Carolina on the phone. Let's just get right to it. Do you want to just patch him in? Okay. Hello, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Mark. How are you?
I'm fine. I've got Melanie here as well, who does a mean Gertrude Stein. I don't know if she's going to do it for you.
Wait a minute. Melanie's with you right there?
She is. She is. She's been homesick for 2 days, so. But she's.
Hi, Melanie.
Hi.
Hey. So Melanie, when they made the long drive up here for the final webcast last year, Melanie and her sister, they listened to Stein like half the way. And now every time they get together, they say, would he like it if I told him? If I told him, would he like it? What's the line you like to say, Melanie?
No, not now, and now.
That's great. Now, these little Steinian kids wandering around North Carolina. You'll adjust well to life down there. Hi, Mark. You have a question for Bob and Michelle or us or anybody?
I do. First of all, let me just say, that it's an absolute privilege to be talking to Michelle Taransky and Bob Perlman. Chronic Meanings, I think, is probably the most or one of the most powerful things I've ever read. And since I have the opportunity to tell you that, I wanted to say it.
Thank you. Why is it so powerful?
Well, as I look at it, just look at the structure of it. As I read it, and I was reading it to myself before you came on, and the evocation of loss, how every line, one after the next gets cut off prematurely. It's just, it echoes traumatic loss. It really does. The single fact is matter. Bam. 5 words and say only. Bam. Black sky at night. Reasonably. Bam. It echoes the sort of rumination somebody goes through an acute loss, and it's just unforgiving.
So, Mark, I know you have something else you want to say, but I just want to ask a question of Bob on this, because this was already a kind of anthologized poem. This is a poem you chose for your selected poems, but I've sort of gone over the top with this poem. I'm always teaching it. I'm always using it. And do you ever regret? And I'm sorry in a way that because there's so many great Perlman poems, and everybody's talking about this one. Do you ever regret? I mean, it's not a trick, but it's a thing you can't do more than once or twice. And do you worry about a poem that's so brilliant in its process that it can't get reproduced and may strike somebody as a little too neat?
Well, I don't know about the neat problem. I guess I don't worry about that.
Yeah.
No, I think about this poem, and I'm actually just before this, I incorrectly, but I tried to write a post to the forums.
No, you did it well.
I did it.
You just did it as Bob.
I did it as Bob.
Did we find it?
I posted it to the discussion forums and Twitter.
And so I'm thinking about the poem and because of the class and the forum and wanting to say something. And I'm about to say, and I signed off, and I said, I've got to go talk now. I thought I was going to be talking with Lynn about my life, but anyway, I got to go talk, and then at the end I'll say a few more things. And one thing I really have it in my mind to say is that I'm really quite convinced that this is the only one of these that I'm going to write.
Right.
I felt this. In a way, I should. I mean, what I say in my post, I'll say it now. That I didn't know Leland Hickman very well. In fact, I only met him once, and he was a very kind of nervous, shy guy, and we shook hands, and that was about it.
He was in L.A. You were in Berkeley.
I think, yeah, and I think I was giving a reading down there, and anyway, but he was a fantastic editor, very heroic. Just worked hard to finance this quite elegant, spacious, well-edited magazine, Temblor, that had like 200 pages per issue, or a big substantial one. He typeset, he did the editing. There were never any typos. It was always interesting conjunctions of writers. So it was really a total good thing for the poetic community. And then I heard that he had AIDS, and so that he was dying, which was that was the instant outcome. That's what that meant then. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, I should respond in some way, and I didn't know what to say. I mean, I'm sorry you're dying. It seemed very lame. And so I came up with this somehow in the midst of this. I came up with this idea, and I knew that would somehow put everybody literally in that position of just going along ordinary life and having it be cut off. And so I knew, I sort of knew right away, it was a good gesture on the personal level, and I knew it was a good form. I mean, I did a little monkeying around with 4 words, 3 words, 6 words, and 5 words was just the right amount to really get up ahead of steam. You could say all sorts of ordinary things, interesting things, and quite often it was a kind of, would lead you right to the cliff of, you weren't quite finished at 5 words, whereas 6 words you were finished. Anyway, so I just felt like, this is really, this is good. I knew, and it was weirdly easy to write. It was like I could say anything, because all I had to do was say 5 words about being alive. My wife was at one point said, I'm going to Joe's for a few minutes, and I'm going to Joe's for. I'm going to Joe's for, 5 words. So it wasn't all like that, but it could be the most, intense, melodramatic. Sorry, is this?
No, we'll figure that out. You're good.
Okay. I could be very emotional. I could be really, hyper ordinary. I could do all sorts of things, and so, but I knew it was the. I mean, I didn't want to kind of copyright it, and then every time something sad happens, well, I'm going to write a 5-word elegy. I mean, so it was like the one time.
I think maybe we lost Mark. Yeah.
The one time that I was going to do this, I think I'm off the air too. But anyway, the one time I was going to do this, so that, along with it being very easy and weirdly satisfying, I was very interested. It was easy, and I was really interested, and I knew it was just going to be this one time I was doing it. So
what I'd like to do, Bob, since we're on the topic of that poem, is invite Anna, Max, Molly, Erica, each to say something about it, and then get Bob to respond again. I put you guys on the spot, so I don't know if you have something to say, but Anna, you know that poem pretty well. You want to say something about it? Let's collect some comments about it and then go back to Bob. What do you think, Anna?
Well, I've just been thinking about, for the last couple minutes, what Bob just said, how each line is 5 words about being alive. It's breaking my heart right now. I don't know. I don't think I can say anything else.
So what struck you? Why is that so important?
Because if you're thinking of these as of each line as a 5-word elegy, I love that we then have that juxtaposition that it's not 5 words about being dead or 5 words about the sudden loss. It's 5 words about being alive, and that's what
Death
gets
happens in the
cut
blank
off.
spaces afterwards, and writing is living, is what
Yeah.
you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Very Steinian. Erica, any thoughts on this poem that you just want to throw out on the table so we can get Bob to respond?
I have to say I'm with Anna. I'm also really thinking about the idea of 5 words about being alive. And every time I read this poem, I'm stunned by the line breaks and how amazing it is that you get lines like a story familiar as on our wedding night So
It's funny. I mean, I feel like this mic is not on.
No, it's good.
It's good enough. You can hear.
Yep.
Okay. That, I mean, I somehow was in a weird position of, I mean, the composing part of me was a little bit free from the emotion that I was feeling and evoking, and but the composing part of me there was a weird, I hope this doesn't sound too weird to the memory of Lee Hickman, but a weird kind of glee that just, gee, how interesting it is to live for 5 words, and how many different things you can say with 5 words, and or how many different things you don't get to say them, but how many you can start to say with 5 words. And so I don't think I threw out any lines, if I'm not mistaken.
Really?
I don't think so. I mean, I have I mean, this may just be a whole, bag of false memories. Who knows? I'm very bad. I have a very spotty, vague memory. But I don't think I threw out anything, and it was just, yeah. So I mean, I could just, I too had I had a weird kind of, like I said, gleefulness about those line breaks. I mean, I'm very scared of heights, but it felt like with these 5 words, it was like, oh, you could just be sort of, charging along the path, and all of a sudden there's a cliff.
Right.
And normally that would be something I really wouldn't want, but in this case, it was like I could go right up to that edge.
So the feeling of readers is vertiginous as well. Falling off the cliff. I want to collect from Max and Molly quick further responses, because we were heading in that direction, and then bring Mark Snyder back in, and then we'll see where we go from there. Max, any thoughts on this poem that you'd like to add? We've all talked about it a lot, but it seems like we could keep talking about it because it keeps rewarding the attention. Max?
Sure, and I'm noticing this time, we're noticing again, the full stop or the period following every fragment, that the fragments are not left open, but rather are closed by that punctuation. So I guess I'm wondering a little bit more about Bob's choice there, what that's doing. I mean, it kind of creates this sense of at once abruptness, but also of a kind of closure and self-contained
I'll add something
meaning.
to that. See if we get Bob's response. That makes them not modernist fragments, but language new sentences. They become sentences rather than merely fragments. Does that make sense, Bob?
Well, I certainly know what you mean, and I thought about the period, not period. I think that was the one decision that I really wasn't sure about, and I think I typed it up both ways. And this was, gosh, was this back in the day when you typed things? And I think it was.
Maybe so, depending on
we're talking
what
about
you had acquired.
What they used to call writing on a typewriter.
Typewriting.
Electric typewriter.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, no, I finally, I guess, without the periods, it's a little too pretty and poetic, which is an adjective that I'm very pro poetry, but I'm anti-poetic, I guess.
Yes, that's true. Can we go to? Let's go to Molly for one last contribution to this discussion about the poem, and then we'll go to Mark.
Yeah, I'm really I'm surprised to hear that you didn't know Lee Hickman that well, because this poem is so personal, and I guess it makes sense that maybe it's a little bit more universal. And I just wonder how it would have been different if this had sprung from maybe somebody in your family being diagnosed or somebody else that was closer to you. Would it have been more or less, the poem have been more or less personal?
I think it would have been harder to write, more turgid. I don't know. I mean, I somehow think not knowing Lee, except for, the sense of respect for him, and real, a sadness that this was happening. But yeah, I didn't think it had to be about him. I mean, I just thought it had to be about being alive. So I think a line like "Midnight, the pain" is practically,
yeah.
But that in a way, I didn't go there very much. Another line that is definitely in my memory, directed at Lee, is near the end, and it's a complete sentence. Like a few of them are complete sentences, and I decided not to worry about that as I was doing it. I thought, well, a couple of complete sentences are fine, but you don't have that choice.
Yeah.
It's a very complete sentence, and I was thinking that this was really addressed to Lee, but it's addressed to everybody, and myself, and etc. But you're right, I mean, the not knowing him gave me that weird compositional sort of largesse or carelessness, insouciance.
It was also a cultural moment, and a moment of people feeling on the outside and all that. So you needed to do more work than simply talk about a person. So this is a great poem. I think, I think I have never heard anybody say, this is no good. Everybody gets the experiment, and then they admire what it means. So it's just great. So I think snaps all around this room for this fabulous poem. You get snaps. And now let's bring Mark back up, and I'm going to ask Mark to address a more general question. He probably had one in mind, and we'll start with Michelle Taransky. Mark, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Good. I want to direct you away from chronic meanings and to maybe a more general question. You are really a 9.3 kind of guy in your own writing, your own conceptual writing. But chapter 9.1 brings you there. These are all chapter 9 sections. So what do you find when you read and reread the so-called language poets' poems? What do you find that is taking you toward the kind of aesthetic that you like? That's a tough question, but see what you can do with it.
Well, actually, it leads into really where I was going, in that I think we get to a point here with 9.1 where the way I see it, we've been trending towards this for a while, and I think we finally get to the point where form starts to eclipse content in terms of importance.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we haven't quite reached totality yet, but we're getting there. The question I really have is, and this is a devil's advocate kind of question. This is coming from the perspective, I'm putting the hat on of somebody who's just seeing this for the first time.
Okay.
By doing this, when we foreground and we take content and put it in the background, one of the effects of that, of course, is that these poems tend to appear, at least at the beginning, to be more opaque.
Opaque.
So the devil's advocate question I have is there such a thing as being too opaque?
Okay.
Do you get to a point where there isn't enough content to support the form?
Good. Fantastic question.
And you basically have nonsense. So.
I'm going to direct it at Michelle first, and then call on others who might want to speak to it. It seems to me that in creating the original version of Chapter 9.1, cheated on this question, because we are using the so-called we do two Lang Po kinds of memoiristic poems. So you've got Albany and My Life, which nobody could describe as particularly opaque. Then we've got Bob's chronic meanings, which is, on the accessible side because of its clear form, its mode. And Charles Bernstein's A Restless World Like This Is, which is one of the more accessible poems he's ever written. So, I kind of cheated by making it, I don't want to say easy, but less opaque than it might be. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Michelle, would you answer Mark's devil's advocate question?
So if we do accept the premise that the content is opaque, I think that's interesting because it forces us to really think about this form and the possibilities of the procedure, that Bob has made the choice to use this form, and it's very constrained, but that there might be some freedom and some things he could say in this form that he couldn't say in others. So I think even without the content, maybe if we just had blanks with 5 and a period, we would be able to infer and interpret something about the feeling of that form.
I don't know. I disagree in that particular case.
Go ahead.
I think that I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just a crude reader or writer or whatever. I always, you read for content. I think content is inescapable, and form is often. Many poems, the form is a little bit unclear, or it's inertial, or it's just part of an ongoing period style, things like that. So form sometimes is a little harder to grasp, but I think there's always content.
I don't think Michelle was saying otherwise.
No, but I think that's like. I think as long as we're reading a language, American English in this case, there's.
Well, you don't have to accept Mark's
content.
Premise, which is
no,
fine.
I guess I'm pushing back on the less
Opaqueness.
Content, opaque.
Right. Well, the whole form-content split is a heuristic and pedagogical device. Clearly, when we get to a poem like this, the form is the content, and there's all kinds of content there that does and doesn't have to do with Lee Hickman. But the form does, and so you have to talk about one and the other.
Right.
I want to ask Julia and then Jason, who just looks like the kind of guy who has something he wants to say on this topic, and both of you briefly, if possible, and then we'll move on. Mark, I'm going to ask you to hang up the phone so someone else can call, and thank you so much for calling.
Thank you all.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good day.
All right, you too. Julia,
I want to say 2 quick things. One, the first time I read My Life, I'm going to disagree with you here. I found it incredibly opaque. I found it really difficult, not because what is said isn't accessible or clear, but because the form is so challenging. But then I came to appreciate that the opacity is the content, because in this book, Lynn Haginian's saying something really important about the way memory functions. So,
especially in the early sections where she's very young and can't possibly have remembered all this stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, memory when you're that young is opaque.
Yeah. So the opacity is kind of the point. The opacity is a meaningful.
In Silliman's case too, in Albany too, there's a certain amount of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But neither one of them, the guy who mimes what you guys are talking about is James Joyce at the beginning of Portrait of the Artist. There was a moo cow that went down the road. Yeah. Where he's really trying to bring us back to that infant speech.
Yeah.
And I don't think that Lynn or Ron is
miming
I
think Lynn does.
Infancy.
I think she does in the very early sections.
Well, we could read it and check it out.
Well, we should check it out. But Bob's pointing out attempts. I mean, Faulkner did it. James did it sort of in What Maisie Knew.
Yeah.
From a third person, I think he uses
Wordsworth.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of experiments in doing that, and I think it's arguably Stein would do that, though she doesn't have explicit young speakers.
Except in The World Is Round.
Yeah.
She's actually she's being grandma in a way. She's speaking to the young, which is not quite being young.
And we read a very formalistic, conventional formal poem, which has radical content, County Cullen's ballad, where he's trying to write like an 8-year-old and using a ballad to remind us of that. And there's similar speaker ventriloquy going on there. Jason, briefly on this question that Mark posed, and then we'll go to who's ever on the phone. I also want to make sure that Julia reports anything going on online. Yes, Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing
Welcome
okay.
Back.
Thank
it's good
you.
to see you.
If I'm not clearly speaking, it's my oral surgery.
Yeah, you've had some oral surgery.
Yeah.
And is oral surgery the absolute hardest thing to go through? I mean, it's hard.
If you're a poet and you think about the mouth, it's fun to have things happen there.
But you certainly are giving up agency, as they say.
I'd love to give up agency.
Yeah, you do.
Open wide.
Say something about form and content, and we'll go to Julia.
Well,
and
I think that
Lily's having fun with this.
I think
Jason
something
cracks you up.
Jason's great.
I think that Lily. No, Lily. But what I think is that I think this poem is really important for this set of poems.
Which one?
Chronic Meanings.
Oh.
In terms of bringing us, well, I think that we have Ray Armentrout in the ModPo Plus, but I think that in that it provides a bridge between Armentrout and the more, say, autobiographically straightforward work of
My Life in Albany.
Of My Life in Albany, yeah. But I think that what Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that part of what you're reacting to is the very idea that opacity implies a lack of content.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way that with Chronic Meanings, there's something. Yes, there's this. One could call it an elegy, or it may drop off at the end, but at the same time, I mean, who finishes? What life is a complete sentence that is under full control until the last moment, and I think that's why the poem, in part, resonates so much. That every life is stopped mid-sentence.
I mean, what you said there. 30 seconds. Somewhere in the middle of that, there's a sentence in there about the sentence, and that could be pulled out and made the epigraph of the story of what the language poets and their colleagues gave us as an idea. I mean, that's really a step forward, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. A poem like In a Restless World Like This Is, which is its opacity is the content, because it's probably a response to 9/11, and it's about wandering around a city and not having any place to go, or really feeling directionlessness.
Right. Well,
and the sentence is it's like an impossibly circular sentence or two, which does exactly that. And without that form and its opacity, we wouldn't get the point that Charles Bernstein's trying to make about how directionless he felt. Yes?
And Rebecca asked a great question in the forums about that poem's being a sonnet, being a 14-line poem.
Is it 14? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. It is 14 lines. So you know what? Once we take this phone call, I'd like to play, after we're done with the topic of the person who calls us, I'd like to play the Bernstein poem and talk about it, okay? So let's go to the call, and remember that we said we would get back to that. It's Rebecca. Which Rebecca?
Rebecca Copas.
Oh, yeah, she's great. Hi, Rebecca. Lily, who's on the phone?
This is Sabrina from Toronto.
Great. You bring her up? Hi, Sabrina.
Hi, I'm happy to join you. I feel like I'm a bit off topic. Firstly, I just would like to say how much I've
Well, wait a minute, Sabrina. You're calling from Canada, but you have a South African accent. Are you from South Africa?
Yeah, I'm actually from Zimbabwe.
Cool.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Toronto?
Yeah. Actually, my accent reminds me about people having very different perspectives, and maybe this will talk to my kind of a comment. I'm a real neophyte in poetry, and so I've been learning a lot. When Bob talks about reading for meaning and content, that's the kind of reader I am. For me, the beat poems so far have had the most resonance for me.
Yes, because there's a lot of content there.
Sorry?
Because there's so much content there. I mean,
so much content. I like the political. I like to hear divergent voices.
Yeah.
This week, I'm sort of lost. Bob's poem, I really could appreciate. The first two, I mean, you know, when I think about form, sometimes I can appreciate it, but sometimes, like with the New York poets, it just seems too clever by far for me. It just leaves me
It's too what by far?
Clever, by far. Yeah.
Clever,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm sort of grappling with certain things. This week, I'm floundering.
Yes.
It just feels like I'm lost.
This is a great moment.
But I'm just sticking through it. But I wanted to ask in terms of...
Oh, can I stop you?
Sorry?
Can I stop you?
Yeah, of course.
I would like to translate what you just said into a question and pose it to various people, because you've given us the opportunity, non-defensively, to talk about what we think the value of these language poets, so-called, that we've presented, what's the value of it, and why, and do a little bit of minor cheerleading for it to see if we can get you, because you're obviously an open-minded person, to see if we can get you to come from Chapter 7, where the beats spoke to you, to Chapter 8, where the New York poets seemed a little too clever, to Chapter 9, where they're not really, I mean, Bob is very clever, but they're not really clever. They're not like the New York, it's not high hilarity like, you know, Frank O'Hara every day writing some Lana Turner poem. It's I think, a little more serious and a lot more political. So I guess what I want to do is just hold you there. I want you to stay on the line, please, Sabrina, and invite some people to talk about what is it about these poets. And maybe start with Julia, and then maybe we'll go to Ari here, Ariel. What is it about these poets that actually should get someone like Sabrina, if I can put it that way, to get all excited and to find something that resonates politically, and it's in diversity of views and perspectives? Why should it work? What do you think, Julia?
Well, when I think about reading these poets after the New York school, I do definitely think about the political, and I think it's also valuable to think about the particular historical moment that these poets are coming out of. And
these poets, the 9.1, these are 60s and post-60s poets who are, if I can say, radicalized, turned off by old left literary ideas. You get that explicitly in Silliman. Interested in new left, but wanting to come up with an alternative mode of representation that will engage the formal problems of political life as opposed to just the content problems. That's a giant overview of your generation, but why not?
And I think they're doing it in a way that's not so dissimilar from the New York school poets. So it's, in some ways, it is an alternate version of the I do this, I do that poem, the walking around poem. In fact, we were reading a number of poets about walking around. Yeah. And so there's something about how to make poetry see what's happening in this moment that is just necessarily, you know, different.
Fantastic. Let's go to Ariel Resnikoff, and then I'm looking here. Let's say Erica Kaufman will go next in response, and then we'll go back to Sabrina. Ariel, what do you have to say? Why read the language poets? Why should Sabrina, you know, come forward to this group and be okay, be comfortable with it? Why is it good for her to do this?
I guess I think of, I guess I'll connect it to this question of opacity also, this question of difficulty in poems. And I think of what Charles writes in Attack of the Difficult Poems,
which is a book called The Attack of the Difficult Poems by Charles Bernstein.
Where he talks about the fact that, first of all, life's not easy. Sometimes we flounder in life, to use your term, Sabrina, and not all people are easy. And so I suppose when I come to difficult poetry and to language poetry, one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that it's incredibly diverse. So there are poems that open themselves, and there are poems that stay closed. And I guess the way that I come to it, and I could recommend coming to it, is as though you're coming to someone you've never met before, and having a meeting and letting it be whatever it's going to be, and also giving it a second chance and a third chance, but allowing not allowing the difficulty or the opacity to overcome you, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to Erica, and then Sabrina, what I'd like you to do is engage in a conversation with Michelle and Bob and the three of you for a minute just to talk about this a little more, and that'll be a chance for you to ask that question if you had in mind, or just listen to them and respond. So let's go to Erica first.
Well, to be honest, this week and next week are probably two of my personal favorites of the course.
Whoa, 9.2, aleatory, chance operations, computer-generated poetry, one of your favorites.
And language poetry, too. This week and next week is kind of where I get very excited, and I think that part of that is because I feel like, going back to the original question, what poetry like this does for me as a reader is it reminds me that you can't understand everything, and that's okay. And it asks you to engage with language in a way that's really different and shifts the way that you can read and think about words. And of course, I always think about Joan Retallack, who I know that we're going to get to next week, and I think it's in the introduction to her amazing book, The Poethical Wager, where she talks about the chaos of the contemporary moment and the way that one might engage in a wager with language to make sense of it. And for me, you know, the process of having to enter into a language game with a poem is another way of doing that.
Yeah, so well put. Thank you. Sabrina, are you still on the line?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay, I want to tee this up. I'd like you and Bob and Michelle to talk for a minute. I'd like to tee this up by saying something, drawing something from next week's poems, chapter 9.2, about aleatory or chance operations or quasi-non-intentional poetry, which is really weird shit, you know, and like turns a lot of people off, but excites Erica, so that's cool. And me, among others.
And, you know, I really appreciate it, and I will give it a second look. But as I'm sitting here, I'm just thinking, not everybody has the luxury or the time or the energy or the capacity to do all this dissection. And certainly it's been really fascinating for me to grapple with some of the poems and to really understand this. But it seems a bit bourgeois sometimes to me. And actually the question that I wanted to pose, like, you know, when I thought about the beats and I thought about slam poetry, and I'm thinking about how much resonance it has for young people, often disaffected youth, etc. And so I grapple with this. When I first started doing this course, I was feeling like I'm feeling, and then I got totally into it. In fact, I've stopped doing, I'm doing very little else. I'm doing my work and this. But I'm now just having this kind of reaction. But I'm going to consider it and listen to what you guys are saying and let it wash over me and see how I feel about it.
This is great. I can't wait to hear what Bob and Michelle have to say, because this is something that they have both heard before, and I'd love to hear the response.
Being too blunt, Al?
Yes?
Am I being too blunt?
No, you're not being too blunt at all. The quote, the quotation I was going to cite to get you started here a minute ago was from John Cage next week in our class, who said something like this: for this project, the project he was working on at the time, I went around the country seeing if I could make English less understandable. I wanted English to be less understandable because when it's understandable, he says, we use language to do things to each other, to make each other objects, to hurt each other, or to put things over on each other. And what I'd like to do is make English less understandable first, so that we can start to, as he puts it, do our living. And I guess what I'm saying is that starting with Stein, it's easy to say, oh, well, boy, if you have to really have some money and time and leisure to be able to grapple with this. But I think actually I would say the opposite is true, that Gertrude Stein forces you to start from scratch in the way you think about what you mean, and that's a very healthy thing and indeed a very political thing. So I'm going to let Bob take it from here and go to Michelle afterwards. What do you think, Bob? And you're not being too blunt.
No, you're not being too blunt. I think that, well, I guess I'll start just speaking from myself, bless you, myself as a a writer rather than as a representative of 9.1 here. But as a writer, what I want to read, what I want to write, to me, there's the bottom line is always inspiration, excitement, mental energy. I mean, it's I don't think different than hearing really good music. And there's something. Sometimes you hear really good music, and there's not a lot of people there. Sometimes there's a lot of people there, and poetry often has smaller audiences, etc. But so I think if that as somebody who to go back to what you said earlier, if you are feeling floundering, frustrated, sort of pissed off at the fancy over elaborateness of it, and you don't like it. I mean, on the one hand, there's no way to argue against that, and this line of Frank O'Hara's, I don't know if you have it in the course or not, but the personism essay, where O'Hara says if people don't like poetry, bully for them, and then he says, it's like your mother saying eat your food, and there's nothing, poetry should not be administered like medicine or cod liver oil or anything like that. But there is, I do know in my own experience, musically, in terms of personal relationships, in terms of poetry, in terms of food, in terms of life, all sorts of things, that thank goodness my taste has expanded. And there's some things that, at first I was not really sure about. Now I think they're really great. And so that is the wager here, is that this stuff is actually really great. I think that's the underlying proposition of the course. I mean, Al is enthusiasm. Al is enthusiastic about all this stuff. And he's putting it together historically because he's being pedagogically responsible and all that. Which is good, I mean, time does happen successively, and etc. But ultimately, there's the field of innovative poetry is very exciting, and I think that's where Al is hoping to take people. But on the other hand, if you're not excited after giving it the old college try, as they say, or the old
non-college,
non-bourgeois try, whatever try you want to try. But seriously, after really trying, I mean, then so be it. But I think that somehow, sometimes with the history of the reception of language writing, there has been this kind of trailing history of I'm gonna, Adorno's negative, a weird version of Adorno's negative aesthetics, like, oh well, you can't enjoy narrative, and if you enjoy emotion, and if you enjoy connectivity, there's something a little bit retro about you, and you need to jettison all that, and et cetera, et cetera. That's not necessarily true at all. So the basic. The stuff of poetry is interpersonal excitement with formal, contentful language use. That's poetry.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. Michelle, would you take a quick crack at this? And then Lily wants to add a note, and then we'll go back to Sabrina for a final word from Sabrina. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
I think one way of looking at language poetry and making it work for you if you love the beat poets. I mean, these were poets, Bob, Charles, Lynn, who read the beat poets. So it's not like they wrote these poems having only read Keats or Shelley or other things that one might think are bourgeois. But what about thinking about these poems as conversations with the beat poets, so that the language poets made a choice to not write like that, or to take up some of the same particulars and write about them in a different way? So what if you thought about Bernstein or Perlman's poems as like letters to Kerouac or Ginsberg? Or what would that be like? They are in this continuum that Al and Julia have set up in this way, and you know, sometimes letters are not rhetorical. Sometimes they do make you uncomfortable, as Ari said. And I know it's not fun to be uncomfortable around poems, but I know in this very room, many of us have been to many readings as lovers, enthusiasts of poetry, and we felt uncomfortable. And I think that's very authentic. And to be able to admit that means that I think there is something here for you. Yeah.
Lily, quickly, and then we'll go to Sabrina.
Sure. I just think, like, especially thinking about Ron Silliman and Lynn Haginian on our syllabus this week, if in terms of like whether these poems are bougie or whether they're open to someone who doesn't have an academic background, I think that regardless of what your level of privilege going through the world is, there's a narrative out there about you that you don't like, or someone's told a story about you, or a narrative about like your family, or just there's a cultural narrative about you that you might resent. And so I think that this poetry that tries to find a different way to tell your personal story, or tell the story of your politics or your generation or whatever, that doesn't rely on conventional privileging of information, or whose story gets to be told and whose story doesn't get to be told, then I think that thinking of these as alternatives to conventional narrative might be a way in for someone who otherwise feels a little bit alienated or not related, can't relate to Ron Silliman personally, or can't relate to Lynn Haginian personally because you don't share their ethnicity or their background or whatever.
Great, thank you. Sabrina, do you want to put in a final comment or a final word on this?
Like I deserve a final word, but I just want to say I really appreciate the discussion, and I don't want to convey that I feel pissed off. Certainly not. I'm staying here because I choose to, and it talks to what you're saying. I'm sort of wanting to open my mind to be exposed to different things, and perhaps I will grow to appreciate it or whatever, but I just appreciate you giving me the time and the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
And one more thing. Would you, next week when we get to Chapter 9.2, which is really weird, would you find me in my office hour or send me an email? I just would love to know informally and maybe privately, if you'd like, what your reaction is to that. I'd like to keep the conversation going.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sabrina. Bye-bye. The next caller is going to receive in the mail a Bernadette Mayer reader that Lily will mail to you. And before we do that, and a free vacation and an Amana freezer in Antarctica. What?
Bernadette has an amazing poem about Antarctica.
Okay. Julie, can you read us some tweets?
I will, but I want to also remind us that we were going to talk about In a Restless World.
Yes. So after that, before the call, I'm going to play Charles reading the poem, and then we'll talk about that poem. And I want to get Max and Anna back in for that one, okay?
So there's some great tweets. T. De Los Reyes writes, is opacity the refusal to be understood, or non-transparency that just needs a lot of work? Ray Maxwell says, giving it a second chance in a third sense, which is what Ariel said, is like Stein beginning again and again. Therese Pope says, Erica, these are my favorite weeks too.
Therese, I hope you have your mama back. She's on her way.
Russell Ragsdale. I'm not sure if Russell's quoting someone or if this
Russell
is
in Kazakhstan. He's on his way to Kazakhstan. He's in a plane.
Opacity is a form. I'm talking about levels of opacity. Yeah, so lots and lots of going on about opacity here.
Cool. That's cool. Okay, so thank you so much, Julia. I'm going to play Bernstein in a Restless World Like This Is, and then I'll invite Max and Anna to say whatever they want to get the discussion started about it, and then we'll see if the person on the phone is willing to talk about that or something else. So here's Charles. Ready, Chris?
In a restless world like this is. Not long ago, or maybe I dreamt it or made it up or have suddenly lost track of its train in the hocus pocus of the dissolving days. No, if I bend the turn around the corner, come at it from all three sides at once, or bounce the ball against all manner of bleary-eyed fortune tellers, well, you can see for yourselves there's nothing up my sleeves, or notice even rocks occasionally break if enough pressure is applied. As far as you go in one direction, all the further you'll have to go on before the way back has become totally indivisible.
Max, you want to say something to get us started about that?
Sure. I've always gotten stuck on the "nothing up my sleeves" line, which I think I'm stuck on in our video discussion, our original video discussion of this poem. The reading is Charles's reading is so damn powerful and sincere, and yet this invitation to look up the sleeve seems so kind of tricky and coy almost that I don't know what to make of that. He seems almost like a conjurer at that point, like he's going to play a trick on us, and I'm not sure what that trick is.
So you would say, aside from the performance tone, the actual oral tone, which is sad and sincere, what's the tone of the poem, Max?
It seems sincere up until that moment. I mean, it seems sad. It seems.
What if he's not ironic about nothing up his sleeves? What if he's saying, as he has in recent years, you know, I'm actually quite a transparent poet, even though the language is all non-transparent, and I don't believe in linguistic transparency. What if he's actually saying, there really isn't anything up my sleeve? I'm really, really confused in this restless world. What if he's saying that, Max?
But that's what people say when they actually have something up their sleeves or something hidden in their back pocket. No, that is though. That's precisely what you say to kind of say, like, oh, don't look here where the trick is happening.
I think you're right. And the layers and layers in the Chinese boxness, so-called, of this poem actually suggests that you're right, that there is always something up one's sleeve linguistically. Anna, what's your thought? And then we'll open this up to anybody. Anna, you're smiling.
My one thought on this poem, oh geez. I guess the thing that always has struck me about this is the kind of contrast, I guess, between that final word of indivisible and how much this poem completely relies on its own sort of twists and turns and bends around itself. It gets all wrapped around the axle, but then you end on this word indivisible, which I can't help reading also in the context of it maybe being a 9/11 poem and thinking about the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to do with all those things, but that's just, this is what this poem does to my mind.
Yeah. Julia, can you do something with totally indivisible?
Well, I'm really struck by the way Charles reads that. So he drags it out. He pronounces every single syllable. It's as if he's discovering the idea as he's reading the word. Yeah. And so there is something almost like an epiphany at the end of this poem. And so I'm still going back to Rebecca's question on the discussion forum about what does it mean that this poem is 14 lines. And Bernadette Mayer's remarks last week about the sonnet being a stupid form because it suggests that any kind of conclusion is possible. And so if this is meant to be read as a kind of sonnet, then I think that indivisible is saying something about coherence.
Yeah. Okay. It's possible that indivisible is both allegiant in the sense of the Pledge of Allegiance in a nationalistic moment post 9/11. It's also possible that simply using the word indivisible is ironic, right? Because the Chapter 9.1 poet actually believes in indivisibility, both in fragment, which is a modernist concept, but also of how categories are not dividable, which is a postmodern concept. And totally indivisible, this way back has become indivisible. He doesn't know how to get back, whether it's back uptown or back across the Brooklyn Bridge or wherever it is he's trying to wander in this chaotic moment. Indivisibility is what everybody in the nationalistic moment is talking about, as if this were allegiant, and it's just a powerful word. Jason wants to say something, and then what we'll do is we'll bring the caller in, and then we'll invite Bob and Michelle and others to say something about this poem. So, Jason, quickly.
Okay. Well, I think that the poem is extremely precise, and I think all the words in the last lines are precise in their specificity. And I think that in a way we can go back to the negative response to Claude McKay to think about the choice of a sonnet here. as far as you go in one direction, all the further you'll have to go on before the way back has become totally indivisible. So if a way was indivisible, it wouldn't be traversable in the way of Zeno's paradox. So I think that, okay, break aside. The other thing is that, in a way, this is, to me, a really scary poem about the fear of an indivisible nation rearing up in its full power.
And I would say
that, and I want to just say one quick thing, that ironically I will say that without language poetry we wouldn't have had the end of the Cold War, a way of dealing with AIDS, gay marriage, legalization of marijuana. Language poetry brought the election of the first African American president. The thing is what Charles plays with, I think, in the tone of his delivery of the poem, is a Cheney-esque are working against pronouncements of certainty and surety that are, for them, coming out of a highly politically charged moment in history, are ever urgent to never finish the sentence, in a sense, to never collapse into the danger of coherence.
Wow, Jason, welcome back. That was amazing. What your comments made me think that this poem is in a way has as its ancestor William Carlos Williams to Elsie, where the question becomes, if this is what's happening to America, I'm not sure I know where we're going, but not knowing where we're going is the best thing that could ever happen to us. And I think that, but this adds cleverness to Elsie, because I don't think it's that clever. Lily, and then let's go to the phone, find out who's on, and see where we're going with this conversation. So who's on?
This is Martha from Madison, Wisconsin.
Martha. Okay, great.
She's up.
Hi, Al.
Hello, Martha.
Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm great. Are you coming to see me on November 14th?
I most certainly am.
Oh, great. That'll be
and
fun.
I hope Nathan will come down from
Nathan Walker from Minnesota. That'll be great.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you. Have you been listening to the conversation about the Charles Bernstein poem?
Yes.
Is there any way you can add to it and keep us on that topic?
Actually, I wanted to blow you into a different topic.
You did?
Yes, I did.
Okay. How about
tangential.
this? Tell us what that topic is, and then I, as our genial moderator, will see how we can fit it in.
Okay. Well, this is sort of slightly rambling, but I've had a moment to compose since I formed this. But I wanted to speak to the way there was sort of a bifurcation about the political. As in the New York School wasn't political, the poems coming out of the 60s were political. Again, that's way overstated. But what I really wanted to talk about, I came from the Pacific Northwest during the 60s, lived in Houston. I've lived in Chicago, Midwest, have family on the East Coast. What this seems to me is that whole era was very fluid, both geographically and cognitively.
Did you say
so
clue? Okay, Chris, can you bring her volume up a little? Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, and it was in flux. So, for example, second generation New York poets. Well, yes, New York, but Ted Berrigan also lived in Bolinas, and I'm thinking about Joanne Kaiser responding to some language poets a little bit earlier, unspecific, with comments about Wittgenstein. But
you mentioned Joanne Kaiser. I just want to make sure everybody gets that. K-Y-G-E-R. It's not a,
yes.
It's a poet we haven't talked about.
Yes, right. And other poets that we haven't talked about, certainly not in any depth, but Olson. I have friends that studied with Olson in Buffalo and went to England and influenced what was going on in England, and then there's been moves back.
Yes.
So that the sense of geography and the sense of sort of splitting what is happening from that is one issue. The other issue is...
Oh, can we just take one issue at a time?
Well, this one's related, though.
Okay.
Let me just spit this out.
All right, go ahead.
You can do what you want with it.
Go ahead.
When you think about the New York poets, they are not specifically political, but I think there's something very political about what is happening. It is a period post-war. Some of them served in World War II. Some of them were obviously gay and had issues that had to do with that in New York, freer in New York than maybe somewhere else. I think there are political issues that surround the unpolitical that I think need to be taken into account.
Great.
As you can tell, I'm very historically oriented.
No, I like the we don't do a lot of this.
We don't do that, and I think
we can't.
You can't do everything.
We can't because ModPo is not set up really to provide. A lot of people would like a series of historical contexts and lectures that lay this all out, but I and Julia, I think
no. I think what you're doing is wonderful.
No, I know you do.
I
know. I'm not saying you're. I'm just saying that you're describing a course that could be added to this course, but as Bob pointed out, we're doing a literary history, but we're also being a little light touch, and we're focusing on the poems to allow the literary history to be deduced from the poems and the close readings.
No, and I actually find that very, very helpful.
Good, cool. So I've invited Bob to respond in any way. We don't have a ton of time, but I want to hear his response to this, and then we'll go to others. So Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, the New York School has a reputation, I think, of being apolitical, if you're going to paint it with a very broad brush. And you can point to a lot of poems that seem to be painterly and about poetry, etc. I think that O'Hara is often quite incisive, a polemic political poet, as a gay poet, as a sort of proto-civil rights poet, as a kind of almost a pan-African poet. I mean, his sense of the importance of Césaire, etc. So yeah, no, I just agree that O'Hara is a very forceful, canny political writer, among many other things. His own pleasure is, in a way, the center of his politics, and he's never going to leave his own pleasure out of the writing process. It's a little bit like Emma Goldman, I don't want a revolution where I can't dance.
I love that one. Michelle, do you want to briefly add to this response to Martha?
I just want to say I love the idea of what you said about the course letting us infer the history from the poems. As an English major who didn't take many history courses, I really loved learning a particular history of America and of the world and of that kind of consciousness through poetry. However, maybe incorrect at times it may be, but I definitely believe what Jason said about language poetry making so many amazing things in America and the world happen. And I know that without language poetry, I know, just yeah.
That's cool, and Bob is just cavelling over here because he's responsible for all good things. Julia, your thoughts on any of this?
I just want to thank Martha for pointing out that to say that the New York School was not political and the language poets were political is a false dichotomy. So thank you for bringing this to the webcast.
And it was I who said it, but I'm prone to these giant generalizations because I think of poetry as divided into chapters, and that's my fate. But I think it's, Martha, what you've said is in the middle of your comments, you were sort of flowing geographically all over the place by talking about the convergences and the mixtures and the mélange of places and people, and I think that's what's so exciting. So once you take this overwhelming feeling like there's so many poets, I don't know how to sort them out, then you have ModPo, which kind of neatly sorts them out, neatly sorts them out. Then you leave an experience like this, and you wind up reading Creeley, who doesn't fit quite, who we squeeze him that one non-characteristic poem. We squeeze him into the Beat Week, but he, I Know a Man, of course. And then we can't do Zukofsky, and Kiger is nowhere to be found, but she should be. And Bernadette Mayer appears as a second-generation New York school, but she also reappears with her list of experiments in chapter 9.2 or 9.3.
And she herself resists that characterization.
And she resists the characterization.
And this question isn't that dissimilar from Sabrina's question about, where are the slam poets? Where are all of the other inheritors of the Beat tradition?
So what we do is we create this, heuristic device, or this pedagogical device that allows people to get a relatively easy access to this whole array of modern to postmodern poets, starting with Whitman and Dickinson. And we leave all kinds of things out, and we try to simplify the story, all along protesting its simplifications by being complicated in our webcasts, by being complicated in our discussion forums, to try to get everybody excited about the anthology approach, but pushing them to go further. And the great thing about a MOOC is that it can expand infinitely. Right? So ModPo Plus complicates things further, and then the crowdsourcing thing we're going to do for next year, where lots of people add their own videos, will complicate it further, inviting guests to come and complicate things further, inviting people to call in. This is exactly what we're hoping to happen. So we want to be all things to all people. We want to simplify things for total neophytes who have no idea where to get a grab. And then we want to make it possible for people like Martha and Sabrina to feel like there's a place for them to come in. So thank you, Martha. Do you want to have a final word before you hang up?
See you in Madison. I have way too many final words.
Oh, cool. By the way, you're getting this Bernadette Mayer reader, and Lily will send it to you, or maybe I will bring it to Madison. Here it is. Here it is. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Are you
great.
happy about that? Do you own this book already?
Yeah, I ordered it last week, and it just came.
Oh no! Can I send you a different book?
You could do that, although there is an entire set of poets that I talked to that are experimental, and this wouldn't be a bad book to bring into our discussion group.
I am going to send it. Lily's going to send it anyway, and have fun in Mad City. Is Madison still a radical place? Oh, that's a big
we're
question.
a little bit blasted by Walker and also PR on the university and.
All right.
We're in the world.
Okay. Cool. All right. So
By the way, I do have one thing. Consider Woodland Pattern that's in Milwaukee.
Woodland Pattern in Milwaukee, absolutely. I'm not going to be there long enough to do it, but we have Penn Sound has a very good relation with Woodland Pattern. We have many of their recordings.
Yeah, Ed Sanders is going to be there on the evening of the same day you're in Madison.
Yeah, I know, and I can't get there. But thank you so much for calling, Martha.
Okay, great.
Okay, I want to give the phone to James and then to Ariel and ask you each to be very quick in your response because we're getting toward the end. I think we should unplug the phone. We'll wrap up soon. James, hi.
Hello.
Thanks for coming today. Tell us give us a summary of your involvement with ModPo. Where are you? What are you doing?
I'm a musician and a songwriter and teacher, and so I feel like I've kind of gotten on jumped on a fast train, and it's been a wonderful trip thus far.
Great.
Speaking of trains, I just want to comment on, I believe it was Silliman's Bart.
Yeah, Bart by Ron Silliman. Yeah.
Which it was interesting. I listened to his on Penn Sound, his version of that.
He read it. It's the only recording we have of it. He read it for us.
And it's quite long.
It's long. It's one sentence, by the way.
Yeah, and I found that about a third of the way through, I forgot where I was and what I was doing, which made it come alive in a different way. And it was, I know that a lot of the poems that have been discussed have been short or parts of a poem, and it was quite interesting to enter into something that had some breadth in terms of time.
Yes.
And a quick comment with respect to the process that he went through, which might tie into next week a little bit. I was thinking I might mention this. To relate an experience that a friend of mine had with John Cage, having gotten a bit of instruction about a technique that involved going onto a bus and taking a pad of paper and a pencil, I think he said, and just let the the movement of the bus engaged the pencil over
Literally,
over
your hand is moving because the bus is bouncing.
Yeah, and I thought, I mean, that actually came to me when I was reading.
It's like a step beyond Bart, but it's very Bart-like because by the end of that poem, you all recall, Ron begins to get tired holding his pen. He's standing up, and he's got his favorite. He's very obsessive about his pens, and he's got his favorite pen, and he's bumping along, and people are starting to stare at him because he's writing, and he's writing about them, and it becomes a body thing. Yeah, very similar. Thank you, James. Thanks for coming. What we're now doing, and we can start with Ariel, is we are going to get final words. We're going to go around and get everybody a chance to get a final word, but it's got to be brief. We're going to allow Michelle and Bob to give slightly longer final words because they're our special guests. But everybody in the room gets a final word. That means it's got to be brief. Something about the language post, something about chapter 9.1, something about where we are in ModPo, etc. Ariel, you first.
I just wanted to tie back Sabrina's comment, Michelle's response, and then Martha's comment back to the Charles Bernstein poem, and also put a little pitch in for pen sound, because I think for Sabrina, if you're still listening, pen sound is something which is a sound archive, which can help you gain access to difficult poems. I think hearing Charles read that poem is a different experience than reading yourself. And one thing that I noticed was that Charles reads and speaks with a very thick Upper West Side New York accent.
To say the least.
And this poem is a poem about being lost in New York City, a New Yorker being lost. And to relate that back just quickly to the New York poets, you listen to Frank O'Hara read, and he has a sort of a Baltimore accent, and he, as much as he says he wants to leave New York, you get the sense that he actually really wants to stay.
Yes.
Charles, who is in New York right now, in this poem, you get a strange sense of disconnection from a city that he thought he knew, or in that accent.
It's disorienting.
That's right. So I just wanted to say that.
Well put. Let's go all the way back to Eric for a final word. Eric, this is your first word today. Sorry, but it'll have to be brief.
There is so much really great language poetry. There's a lot of free play. There's a lot of problematizing of free play. There's a lot of life, humor, sex, the body, joy, the environment. We're just touching on a few places here, but if you have some time, come back to language poetry. There is a world to discover.
Thank you. That's a great pitch. Jason, quickly, final word.
Let's read a line from Bob's Unruly Child. The
Unruly Child, which is in ModPo Plus.
Yes. That beautiful tongue-in-cheek hostage situation.
Don't turn the mic off, but that was fabulous. Thank you. Lily, final word?
My office hours were supposed to start at 1, so I'm not there if you're looking for me.
And that's your final word, but once we're done, you'll go to your office hour.
Yep.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go to Anna Strong. Anna in Boston, final word on any of this?
This is a weird final word, but I feel like I should say it. And I'm sorry, Al, this isn't going to be totally brief, but a close friend of mine who became a close friend since I started graduate school last year died rather unexpectedly in September. And I've been thinking about him a lot this week because we became friends over Charles Bernstein and Bob Perlman. And I guess since we talked about chronic meanings and we're talking about Charles, I just haven't been able to stop thinking about him today. So, to a life cut very short, it's kind of fitting that I was here with you today, all of you ModPoers and Bob especially.
In memory of your friend, Anna, thank you. Thank you very much. Erica, final thought, final word?
I want to just have my final word be a quote from My Life by Lynn Haginian. And the quote would be, "But language is restless."
It sure is. I think there's a whole thread in the forums. Language is restless.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a word from Bernstein as well as from Haginian. Molly O'Neill, I think Max had to go to class. Max, are you gone? Yeah, he's gone. Okay. Yeah, okay, sorry, just noticed. Molly in Los Angeles, final thought?
Yeah, I just want to return real briefly to Sabrina's comment about the act of working with these poems being sort of bourgeois, and I couldn't disagree more. I think that the language poets are so blue-collar in their insistence on doing the work of interacting with these poems and making them accessible by writing through daily life and by leaving those little bits and pieces of observation open for us to create our own connections. And I think that, I think if she comes back and maybe takes another look through that perspective, maybe she'll be surprised.
And I would recommend Molly, your own participation in the discussion about BART, both the video discussion and the discussion we had with Ron in my office where we recorded a long conversation. That is a blue-collar poem on Labor Day 1976 about using mass transit and moving in and out of different classes and ethnicities of the San Francisco Bay Area. Michelle Taransky, thank you for joining us today. Do you have some final thoughts?
I think maybe this would be like ModPo++, but the language poetry reader, which are some manifestos and different pieces by the language poets about language poetry, was really helpful to me when I first started reading this work. And to echo what Molly said, it shows the poets engaging with the work of poetry and not just writing poems from the top of a hill looking down and casting them off, but really doing the work of trying to make something new that has been going on for a really long time. So the language poetry reader was great.
Good recommendation. Bob, final thoughts?
Yeah, I would like my final thought to be poetry. This is Bernadette Mayer's sonnet. You jerk, you didn't call me up. I haven't seen you in so long. You probably have a fucking tan. And beside that, instead of making love tonight, you're drinking your parents to the airport. I'm through with you bourgeois boys. All you ever do is go back to ancestral comforts only money can get. Even Catullus was rich, but nowadays you guys settle for a couch by a soporific color cable TV set instead of any arc of love. No wonder the G.I. Joe team blows it every other time. Wake up! It's the middle of the night. You can either make love or die at the hands of the Cobra Commander. To make love, turn to page 121. To die, turn to page 172.
And that's a poem that she read here a week ago. It's fantastic, Bob. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, too. And I want to just, while we're on Bob here, just want to recommend that people go to the thread where Bob is going to be talking at some point today, maybe tomorrow as well. And also to look out for an essay that Bob is finishing on Kenneth Goldsmith, a Chapter 9.3 poet. He's are you going to release that at some point, or is
yeah,
part
no,
of
it's in my next critical book, but it's and it's going to be in some collection. I forget which, but it's
Right.
It's Kenny on Colbert, and
Right.
I transcribe it and I give a close reading of their postures and gestures, etc.
That should be cool. Julia Block, final thoughts?
I also wanted to read a line from Lynn Heginian's My Life. Language which is like a fruit skin around fruit.
Very cool. Well, thank you. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to do two final shout-outs and then say goodbye to everybody. The final shout-outs, both of them concern this notion of completing a massive open online course that's free and non-credit. There's been a lot of news stories about this. They are almost all crap. They are almost all bullshit. They talk about completing a MOOC as completing the requirements for a certificate. If you don't do that, they call you a non-completer, or they actually in some articles call you a failure, meaning you failed. And I want to just quote a couple of people in respect to that. One is Dalila Dewali, who's a persistent ModPo person. She's also in Facebook, in our Facebook group. And she says, I feel very self-centered talking about myself every time I post something here, but I just have to say something. I just decided that I'm not going to get a statement of accomplishment this year. Julia, what do you think of that?
Great.
That sounds fine to us for ModPo. Not that we disrespect people get the statements of accomplishment. We're called, I think, certificate of completion, actually. And most importantly, she says that's okay. I have a very hard time letting things go. When I start something, I do it all the way or don't do it. But I'm on exchange and have a lot of work to do throughout the semester and don't want to force myself to do ModPo when I'm tired. So I decided to just watch webcasts. Watch webcasts, do all the assignments, and then watch video discussions when I feel like it. I won't be able to do quizzes. How do you feel about that, Julie?
Great.
Nor post on forums every week until I do it forced or fast. And that is not what ModPo encourages. This is a big step for me. In other words, not being an A+ student is a big step for her, Dalila. But I feel it's a right decision. After all, a statement of accomplishment is just a paper. It's actually not even that, I think. You have to print it yourself. And I don't need it. I have to stop trying to prove myself that I can do things and rather just enjoy the experience. I'm not abandoning ModPo. I will definitely catch up on ModPo Plus and read all the poems again when I have a little more time and am back at home. Poetry deserves that I do it with my entire soul in it. I'm going to watch the Bernadette Mayer webcast now, and we'll see you during peer reviews next week. If the statistics and the journalists talk about what's wrong with MOOCs and include Dalila Dewaley as a non-completer, as a failure, only 4% of people complete the course, then they're wrong and she's right. She's done certainly enough to be counted as someone who completed the course. Go, Dalila. Non-credit free, of course, you can do whatever you want. She's done about 95% of it. And finally, Dabney Narvaez, who's a pal of mine in the forums this year and last year, and he comes into my office hour and says, just dropping by to say hello. I'm a ModPoer from last year. I haven't been able to be as active this year because of my hubby's health, but I have kept up with the webcasts and extra video casts. Love the session on Tuesday with and about Bernadette and Phil. Wanted you to know I'm continuing to deeply inspired by you, Julia, and the team as you nurture the art of poetry and the care and feeding of poetry lovers all around the world. Appreciating you so much, Dabney. So all I can say is, Dabney, you are not a failure either. You are part of the ModPo community, and this is not a course, but a community. And please take care of your husband. Best wishes. Julia Block, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bob Perman, really appreciate you coming by.
My pleasure.
And also being in the forums. Bob. And Michelle Taransky, thank you. You're the best.
Thank you for having me.
Anna Strong, how's Boston? Good? You're okay? She's on silence. She gives us a thumbs up. Erica Kaufman, enjoy the autumn up there in the Hudson Valley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly O'Neill, very much for everything you do.
Thanks, Al.
And we'll announce your San Francisco meetup, which is, we think it's on what day?
It is definitely on November 6th, so next Thursday.
So we just want to get the time and the place, and we'll announce that. Lily Applebaum, thank you so much. She's giving the thumbs up. So Jason, Ariel, Eric, and James, thank you very much for coming. And Chris Martin and Zach Gardner, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Snaps for these guys, the tech guys. And we're signing off. This was a long one. We will be back in a week. What time of the day is it on next Wednesday? Does anybody know offhand? 10 a.m. So we're 10 a.m. Philadelphia time next. And it'll be a regular webcast. And thank you. But
I think that daylight savings is this weekend.
yeah, so I will put out a note to everybody in ModPo to be careful about that, because our deadline for peer reviews is 9 a.m. Eastern Time after the time changes on Saturday night. So it's going to be very confusing for a whole lot of people, because in the Philippines, T is probably not changing time, so it's really confusing. Don't we hate this time of year? But yes. We'll make it.
So
we'll
we
be
get
okay.
an hour. This is fall back.
We do. We get an hour. I don't think T does. Anyway, signing off. Thank you guys. Love you. See you in a week.